Hi, welcome and good morning. My name is Shannon Stewart. I attend Churchill Park United in the Fort Rouge area of Winnipeg, Manitoba. My main role in our Messy Church is food planning, and I'm also a member of the conference planning team. I'd like to reintroduce Lucy Moore, who I had the pleasure to meet in person at the 2019 Messy Church Conference. Lucy was part of the team that started the first Messy Church about 21 years ago and continues to work for BRF as Messy Church team leader. The love she has for the word is reflected in everything she does as a writer, a speaker, and an educator. So with a pen and paper in hand, let's welcome Lucy Moore. It's nice seeing you again.
Thank you, Shannon, and lovely to see you again too. It's great, isn't it, these Zooms? It was lovely hearing Aileen and Bruce catching up over the break after so many years of not seeing each other. I felt a bit of an eavesdropper, to be honest, but it was fascinating seeing you both catching up again. Really, really lovely. And lovely to connect as well over carving soap. My study pongs now. The poor dog is lying there choking in the corner. And I think I'm getting a bit of an asthma attack myself with the soap carving. Like Aileen, I fear I only had Dove soap, which it's not the right shape for an Inukshuk. So I ended up with a turtle. I did wimp out and do a turtle, which is so embarrassingly bad. I'm not even going to show you. But it was a very fine turtle in its own way, but will probably be best used in the shower as quickly as possible. But lovely to just feel we were all doing the same thing across these miles of distance, of time and space. And of course, that's what the conference is all about. We're trying to connect with each other. We're trying to connect as Messy Church leaders, as followers of Jesus. We're trying to meet together and encourage each other, get ideas from each other, be inspired by each other, and all for its own sake, but also for serving the families that we long to reach with the love of God. So today we're thinking about about messy friendship, which is a very lovely thing to be thinking about. Messy friendship. And the value that lies behind today's talk is perhaps it's the USP, the unique selling point of Messy Church. But I'm thinking particularly about the value of being all age. Martin Payne wrote an excellent book called Messy Togetherness, which explores this idea of being church across the ages. So in our half hour or so of questions and answers at the end of today, you might like to be thinking about questions that you have about being a church for all ages. It's so challenging and nobody has all the answers. But I think Messy Church at least is asking the questions, even if we don't have all the solutions yet. So great to be with you again, and let's think a little bit about messy friendships. It's been said many times before, but have you ever thought what a shower those disciples of Jesus were? I mean, there's Peter. He's jumping in with both feet every time without looking first. There's Judas wittering on about how much it was all costing and who's going to pay for this. That's what I'd like to know. There's Simon, the zealot, wanting to plant bombs all over every Roman fort they came across. James and John scrambling up the promotion ladder, kicking everyone else out of the way. There's Thomas qualifying everything with a yes, but. Matthew, who came with some very, very dodgy friends and business associates, and a handful of others I can't even pronounce, to be honest. And the women that we don't hear that much about, but almost certainly didn't just waft around Judea in a haze of holiness with never a grumpy word to say to each other. And yet, in all these very faulty, very real, very messy people, Jesus chose to hang out with them. He wanted friends. He chose friends and chose to walk with them, sometimes quite literally, throughout his 3 years. And even after his resurrection, we have that lovely little story at the end of Luke about the 2 friends on their way to Emmaus, and Jesus walks with them. I wonder if Jesus actually needed friends while he was in that vulnerable human state. I wonder if the closeness that he'd had with his Father and the Holy Spirit before he came to earth as a baby, I wonder if in some way he missed that closeness and needed human friendship, needed, like we all do, people to be on his side. I think it's so easy to see Jesus as all-powerful and doing miracles and leading in a powerful, kind of manly way. But being human meant being vulnerable and meant being needy and choosing to take on that vulnerability. And perhaps needing friends was part of that. So I think those first disciples, completely shambolic as they were, remind us of a truth that's incredibly obvious, and yet perhaps we need reminding of it in every generation. Because as human beings, perhaps especially as churchy people, our natural inclination is to turn everything into a program, into a structure, into a course. And perhaps Jesus and his ramshackle disciples reminds us that at its heart, what we're doing is about friendships, about relationships, about building those friendships with each other. It's not about a program. It's about shocking friendships that should not be between people. That's the exciting thing about church. Friendships between people who should not be friends. It's really exciting, isn't it? I love the early church stuff that we read about in the book of Acts. And I think it's really exciting that the church grew so shambolically in people's yards and on riverbanks, and didn't need cathedrals, didn't need special buildings at all. It just grew in this organic way. And really exciting that the church was somewhere, perhaps one of the first places, where the boundaries were knocked down. This wasn't about keeping people out. This was about how do we help people in? How do we help people belong? I think perhaps in our democracies, faulty as they are, we might forget how revolutionary that was, the idea of being a community that was open, inviting to everybody from every walk of society. And at the time, I mean, it must just have been jaw-dropping, because the background that they would have had in that sort of first century,
would have been one of these guilds that they had in ancient Rome, these collegia, they were called. And they were all about money and business and protectionism and giving your mates a good funeral. So it was about money and death, basically. And in ancient Greece, there were these ecclesia, these assemblies for running places like Athens, where anyone could join, anyone could be part of that ecclesia, but anyone who was male, anyone who was from a certain class, anyone who was rich enough, and anyone who was actually born in the right city. So it, although it was open to anyone, it was open to anyone in a very, very niche bit of society. So contrasting with that, all the New Testament evidence about the early church points to the fact that it was open to everybody. There were men and there were women. There were slaves and there were free people. There were rich people. There were poor people. There were high status people and low status people. People from different ethnic backgrounds, different countries with very different table manners. People from very different cultural backgrounds. There were old people. There were young people, and everything in between. When you walked into somebody's Roman villa where the church was meeting, where perhaps they were all stuffed into the garden and hanging down out of the balconies and propped up against pillars, and you probably had children paddling in the fountain in the middle. It must have been exhilarating and eye-watering and utterly shocking, especially when they ate together as part of their gathering, showing what a household they were trying to be together, keeping everybody fed, eating together sacramentally, but also because some of them were hungry. They were followers of the way together. And Graham, I wonder if you could bring up the first slide there. It's one we had yesterday of the values of Messy Church. Just the next one, thanks. That's the bunny. If you remember, Messy Church is focused not around a program. It's not around a curriculum. It's not around structures. And even here at BRF, where we try and support Messy Churches around the country and around the world, even here we're very, very structureless. We're a very tiny team. There are only really 2 of us working on Messy Church. And so it's much more of a partnership than a program. And these 5 values are what Messy Church is built around, having Christ at the centre, that creativity that we thought about yesterday and the celebration yesterday, the hospitality, the welcome to all people, and this all-age value, which was there right at the start of Messy Church. I remember at the time it was Martin Payne and myself, and we were working for BRF. And as part of our job, which was bringing the Bible to life in schools and helping churches with dramatic Bible storytelling and how to bring the Bible to life with children, we had a lot of time to think about the best way of nurturing children's spirituality. And we were looking at a lot of models of nurturing children's spirituality. And what we came up with was, at the time, pretty unexpected and unusual, because we came to an understanding that rather than teaching children in age silos, so taking them away from the congregation and giving them age-appropriate teaching in different groups. We came to the conclusion that the best way to nurture spirituality and faith in children was to do it in an all-age setting and provide somewhere where adults and children can get to know each other and get to talk to each other and worship together, learning from and with each other. And when you kind of get to that point, and it took a lot of shaking off of our whole upbringing and tradition and what we'd done in church ourselves. But when you shake all that off and you think, yeah, this makes complete sense, that actually church is meant to be full of people of difference. And one of the big differences we have is that of age. How can we know what Jesus really meant when he put a child in the midst and said, you know, if you want to enter the kingdom of heaven, you have to become like a child. It belongs to such as these. How can you do that if you never meet a child? And so the all-age thing came to be pivotal when we were thinking about Messy Church and how to be a church that welcomed not just children, but children in the context of their families as well. I know you have huge historical divides in Canada, and I don't know how to say sorry, as a lot of it is the toxic legacy that us Brits left you as we trampled all over the world. And I wish there was some way of saying sorry about that, which didn't sound utterly trivial. But I am very conscious of my people's part in destroying other people's worlds. It's been very moving on this conference to hear the stories, those little insights into different cultures, the historic injustices, the repentance, the forgiveness, the hope, the reconciliation. It's moving, it's profound. And I feel privileged to be part of this. But another of the big divides isn't that of race or class or gender, though all of those are very real. It's the divide between the generations. And when you think about what goes on in many, many churches, church ought to be a place where every person is loved and accepted as a child of God. And when you put it that way, most of us would say, well, yes, that's what our church does. But then when it comes to the way we organise our main Sunday worship, if we ask the question, who is this for? Who is this worship suitable for? Many of us would actually have to admit that the worship is great if you're an adult, literate, English as a first language speaker, who likes sitting still and likes learning by listening. For everybody else, it's a bit of an effort. For some, it's so much of an effort that they quietly drop out of church, feeling it's not for them, and they find other ways of meeting God, or perhaps, sadly, tragically, think that God isn't interested in them at all. If you can't read, if you don't speak English, if you prefer moving to sitting still, and let's face it, children are designed to move. They physically ought to be moving. They should be wriggling. It's a healthy thing for them to do. It's not badly behaving. They're doing what they're meant to be doing when they're wriggling, when they're moving about, when they're running and jumping over things. Their bones are still developing. Their backbones aren't set yet. Actually, sitting still is really, really bad for them. So providing space for them to move in worship is acknowledging their difference from us as slightly fossilized adults. I do apologize if you don't consider yourself a fossilized adult, but my bones are certainly happier being still than moving about at the moment. One of the joys of Messy Church is connecting across the age group, of being a church where every effort is made to make the youngest feel as welcome as the most senior. It's a place where the ways that we learn aren't just using our brains, but using our hands and our sense of taste and touch, our bodies. The soap carving was a genius example of that. Our sense of smell came into it as well. I bet all of your studies and rooms still have a vague whiff of that fresh soapy smell ringing through them. We learn in different ways. We have creative approaches to worship so that the words and the liturgical actions aren't the possession of one group of people alone who teach others how to do them and keep them in line, but the actions and the words are created and owned and improvised faithfully on by that messy community. One of the values of Messy Church is being all age, and that comes from this deep conviction that we are best church when we are together with people who are different from us, and by whom we can be discipled, and whom we can disciple in turn, in a friendship rather than in a relationship of authority where one person has all the power and the other person is the vulnerable learner. It's very hard to measure the success of this sort of discipleship. It's very messy. It's like a plant growing wild. Graham, I wonder if you could bring up the slide of the verse from John, which is a very famous one. I am the vine and you are the branches. Remain in me, I in you, and you'll bear much fruit. If you can't see that, then can you see it all right? Can you see Graham's slide all right? Bring it up on the speaker view in the top right-hand corner, and you should be able to see it. I am the vine.
It's a bit fuzzy.
I'll read it out. It's a very familiar one to you all anyway, and if you've got a Bible there, it's John 15. Jesus saying, I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If you don't remain in me, you're like a branch that's thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown in the fire and burnt. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish and it'll be done for you. This is for my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. It's this lovely picture, isn't it, of a vine that's all connected. And that's what we're thinking about in this conference at the moment, this connection between us all. It isn't a matter of life and death if you have a pen and paper, but if you do, then now is the time to just be doodling around any notes that you're making. And perhaps you could doodle today a vine. I don't know if you have vines in Canada. Do you have vines in Canada? You do. There we go. Gosh, grapes are amazing. They grow in all sorts of climates, don't they? Even here in the Peak District, where it's very chilly, there's a grapevine just up the road. There's a vineyard just up the road. Who knew? Apparently it's prize-winning wines as well. But have a doodle, do a nice fat vine with lots of leaves and juicy bunches of grapes ripening on the branches, and give it some trellises to hang on as well, to give it some support. Doodle your name somewhere on a branch. It might be one of the big fat key branches. It might be a little twig, wherever you like, pop your name on. And as I carry on talking, just keep on adding the names of your friends, your fellow disciples. Pop down the ones of your own age, the people who you've walked with through your life, perhaps, from when you were younger, and maybe they're the same age and you're still friends with them today, people who've influenced you over the years. But perhaps there are people who are much older, maybe who aren't with us anymore. They can go on as well. They're part of this beautiful vine. And maybe there are people who are important in your discipleship life who are a lot younger. Maybe they're on there as well. But pop in names as they come to you during this talk. Yes, some vines are very, very unhelpful and unhealthy. I have a beautiful crop of bindweed in my garden, which looks lovely for one season of the year and smothers the rest of the garden for the rest of it. Maybe you'd like to add people from your Messy Church team that you work with on sharing the gospel with families. Perhaps even some of the families and children, the grandparents who come along to your Messy Church, who have given you some sort of insight into God's love. And maybe there are even people, as you look at the screens here today, if you flick onto gallery mode, as you look at the screens, perhaps there are people here who have become important to you, or who you feel are somehow important in your journey. Significant people, people who have touched you in some way. Pop all their names down on your vine. And maybe over the next day or so of the conference, make a point of saying hello to them in the chat, having a chat like Aileen and Bruce in the gaps between, and renewing that contact, because staying connected to each other as well as to Jesus, that central trunk of the vine, is part of what church is all about. It's not about those trellises holding it up. It's not about the structures and the rituals and the liturgies, though those are really important to keep things together. The life is in the vine, the life flowing out from Jesus and flowing so generously through those wonderful networks of friendships, those branches of friendships, tendrils of friendships, new and old. Well, Graham, perhaps you could bring up the next slide, the world map. This is just to think a little bit about your friends. Might be a bit emotional, actually, to think about friends at the moment. It is for me. I had to move 200 miles up country and left some very good friends behind me. Lockdown has meant that it's only now, a year after moving, that I'm starting to make some new friends in this new place that we've come to. I wonder how tidy your friendships are. I don't mean, has your friend got a very tidy house? That's neither here nor there. But do your friendships fit into neat, tidy, predictable patterns? Because mine don't. To some extent, it's interesting, isn't it? With long distance friendships, like Carol meeting up with her Australian friends and Gail meeting up, you do need a certain structure, a certain tidiness. You need that reliability that you're going to meet on Zoom at a particular time, on a particular day, and that keeps the friendship going. To keep in touch with some old friends from our last home, we have fortnightly gin Zooms where we come clutching our glass of gin and tonic and just have 40 minutes of catch-up time with our old friends. And they're invaluable. They're in the diary as a permanent setting. To stay in touch with Messy Church strategic leaders around the world, to stay friends with them and to keep up the relationship of trust that we need to function in a very low structure organization. I have to make sure that I put that in my diary for every few months. I have to have some level of tidiness in my friendships. But day to day, you can't tell when you're going to need your friends or when they're going to need you. They might ring you up out of the blue. You never know when they're going to need you or when you're not going to need them. How do you measure the success of your friendship? Do I say, well, I can safely say that we have a successful friendship with Mike and Wendy because over the last 12 months, we have held 48 40-minute Zooms with them on a Friday night. It doesn't happen like that. That's not a measurement of good friendship. Measuring friendship, you're on a hiding to nothing. And that's why it's really difficult in church, because the things that we tend to measure are the things that actually don't really count. We can measure the numbers and the structures. We can measure the trellis very accurately, but it's much harder to measure something organic and living like the vine. And your Messy Church is probably something ever-changing and organic. The relationships come and go, and you're building them, and they're fragile. And one week you'll come along and you'll really connect with a family, and then you won't see them for 6 months. And it's really hard to measure that. So thinking about success in a Messy Church, it's not about numbers, it's not about how many meals you've managed to cook without actually killing anybody. It's not about how many new people are coming or old people returning, but it is about the friendships that you're managing to create. And isn't it fascinating? Like we were thinking yesterday, seeing a Messy Church through the lens of how can I build friendships in this couple of hours? How can I build friendships in the activity time? How can I build friendships in the celebration? How can I use the meal time to build friendships? That takes you into a whole different way of doing your Messy Church. There's a lovely story, which I hope Graham will be able to show us on a video. This video was made by our fundraising team a couple of years ago. So ignore the fundraising plea at the end. That's not why I wanted to show you it. But it's a story of a Messy Church which really reached out in friendship and really made a difference to people of all ages, a mom, a dad, and their children. One boy, Pip in particular. And I think it says something about the power of all age friendships in a church. So sit back and Graham, perhaps you could play the video for us.
Okay, hang on. Ready? Go! Pip was born end of July 2009, and we didn't know about his diagnosis with Down syndrome until after he was born. He's partially deaf.
He's had bronchiolitis.
He's had bronchiolitis, yeah. He had a hole in his heart that was self-healed. He's incredibly long-sighted and has hypermobility and low muscle tone and a learning delay. We've had to work hard to get Philip to a point where he's coping with life outside of our four walls. Messy Church has been a real help with that, because there are people in the group at Messy Church who understand Pip for who he is, not just a list of diagnoses.
The best thing about Messy Church is the fact it is community. It truly is what I believe to be church. Church is the family, the friends, the people that make up the congregation. And I think that, the fact that it's there and everyone's accepting, everyone's accepted, and it's an enjoyable thing to do.
We know they've prayed for us. Their prayers have helped us to cope with different things that have happened for Philip. We wouldn't have done as well with our kids without them there. Sorry.
We look forward to the monthly Messy Church. We look forward to going and taking part in the crafts and singing the songs and doing all the things that go with that.
As a whole, I've never known such an accepting community. They are the absolutely the best people around. They are, to me, what I would see as true Christians.
Isn't that lovely as a vision of what church can be, of the difference that church can make in a family's life, a community that accepts absolutely everybody of all ages, brings people together across all sorts of divides, and just shows God's love, helping people who might feel kind of excluded from an awful lot of stuff that goes on in society, helping those people to feel that they matter, that they're at the heart of this community. I love that story. If some of you were on the conference last year and remember the other year and might remember Barry Brand, who played an important part in it, and it's his Messy Church, a lovely one down in the south of England. All age discipleship is not an easy nut to crack. I'm quite sure that a lot of children hung out with Jesus, as well as those women who didn't get much of a mention. But I'm absolutely convinced that one thing that we can do as a church is provide a place where all generations can thrive, where every single generation can grow in their discipleship. And we haven't time to see the video, but you can look at the video if you're interested anytime on the messychurch.org.uk website. But we did some research last year into discipleship in Messy Church.
And it was absolutely fascinating, especially doing it over a pandemic, as you can imagine. We went to 6 dioceses in the Church of England and worked with messy churches there to see if the ideas that we'd had about growing and developing disciples in messy churches would actually make a difference. Apologies, BRF is the Bible Reading Fellowship, and it's the organisation that is the sort of umbrella organisation for messy church. So we did this research into discipleship, making disciples, deepening discipleship in messy churches. And the results are very easy to read and find, or you can just watch the headlines, as I say, on the website. It's called A Voyage of Discovery, and it's on the homepage if you just scroll down. I'll put the link on later. But it came up with some really interesting findings, which I will share with you now, because we're thinking about growing in this lovely vine of Jesus's. We're thinking about friendships. And for Jesus, his friends were his disciples were his friends. So what are we finding out about discipleship in messy church? There are 6 or 7 headlines, which I think any messy church can take on board. The first is be a community of reflective practice. And Graham, these are on a slide. If you can flick over to the next slide, then I think they should come up as bullet points as I talk. So be a community of reflective practice. Really interesting if you haven't started a messy church yet, that actually building this practice in at the start, thank you, Carol, is a really good idea. One of the messy churches on the pilot in the research did this. They started and they built in reflective practice in their team meetings right from the start. So they've never known anything different. They think that's how you do church. You plan things together and then you reflect on it afterwards. You don't just charge on to the next thing. You reflect on it and you learn from it. You reflect theologically on what went on at the last messy church and what you can do to do even better at the next messy church. So being a community of reflective practice makes a massive difference in the discipleship of your messy church. Another finding was to be church all month. And this is something about being church, not just on a Sunday, but being church in the community, making all sorts of opportunities to grow those friendships that you've made on your Sunday or in your messy church once a month. Make those friendships keep going in the rest of the month. There was a messy church leader who simply invited people round for coffee. She just had mums round for coffee once they dropped the kids off at school. And she'd met them at the messy church and just said, oh, pop round for coffee. And I don't know what they did as they had coffee, but for some reason they started opening up the Bible. And she ended up running basically a confirmation class with these mums, a very informal confirmation class. And they ended up with 3 of the parents getting confirmed just out of a friendship made over cups of coffee. So being church all month, not just in an isolated spot once a month. Valuing quality as well as quantity. So numbers might be important to your church, how many people you've got coming to messy church, is it worth carrying on doing? But in your head, what matters is the quality of the conversations that go on around those tables, the quality of the conversations that happen at the meal times. Are those about building friendships and about validating people's spirituality? Are you encouraging people as they open up and mention some of the precious, deep, numinous things going on in their lives?
or are you shutting them down? So making a safe space for quality to happen in your messy church. Just running through the rest quickly, giving something up so that your messy church can thrive. The sacrificial nature of people who run messy churches are usually really, really busy with traditional church as well. Maybe it's time to be asked to be released from something that you're doing in traditional church so that you have the time to give to developing discipleship in your messy church. Journeying together was found to be really important. The idea of messy church leaders and families walking together and discovering as a community what it means to follow Jesus is actually really, really significant. Enjoying it came out as really important, and not getting too earnest about it all. A bit like we were saying yesterday about play, not to get too much of our knickers in a twist about the deep meaning of what we're doing, but remembering to enjoy this journey that we're on together. And the last thing, the last headline that we found was something about an intentionality of doing your messy church to be disciples of Christ and to make disciples of Christ. So it might not have any effect in the early days as your team just gets to know people from your community that you've never met before. But if you go into the messy church wanting to make disciples and to be disciples, you all do it in such a different way from if you're just doing it to give people a nice time for 2 hours, or to make sure that they have a nice cup of tea, or whatever the other motivation might be. Going into a messy church with the intention of growing as a disciple ourselves, but also making disciples, is something that's key to the effectiveness of disciple making in messy church. So all these things, none of it is about programs, all of it is about quality, it's about relationships, it's about sacrifice, it's about walking the walk just as Jesus walked his walk with his friends. So our challenge in messy church, especially as it gets bigger across the world, as you develop messy church in Canada and have networks of supportiveness there, and in other countries too. It's lovely seeing the Americans on the screen today as well. One thing to just hold on to is something about, don't let the trellis be the important thing. Let the vine be the important thing. Let the organic, the gentle, the growing, the friendships, the unmeasurable things be the important things for you. That way we can keep that flexibleness and playfulness in our thinking. That way we can twine out like a vine twines out when it's not pruned. Vines shoot off in all sorts of directions, reaching out to the edges, keeping on, drawing in people who aren't part of the family yet. So if we do that, if we stay tightly connected to Jesus through whatever means works for you, if we stay strong in our relationship with Jesus and our relationships with each other, then we can end up with this really fruitful vine, a fruitfulness of discipleship. And Graham, if you flick onto the final slide, just to finish there, I hope you like this. This was grape pressing in a messy church. So we had great fun pressing grapes. Some of it was done nice and hygienically through sieves, and some of it was done less hygienically in a paddling pool
with feet treading it down, which was far more fun. And actually the final slide, we might end up not just with grapes hanging on the branches, but perhaps with this amazing vintage to share with the community, like the water turning into wine at the wedding at Cana. And the bottles that you see there, I don't know if you can read the labels, but they are made at Messy Church in Chichester from a grape pressing. And I often think back to that because those were made in about 2007, something like that. It was a long time ago. I often wonder what sort of a vintage those grapes have turned out to make. So messy connections, staying connected to Jesus, staying connected to each other, and remembering we're all part of that vine. Thank you very much.